Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Unapologetically Jewish podcast. My name is Matthew Taub. I have my guest today, an incredible voice online, political commentator, Eyal Yakoby. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right. We're going to dive right into it. I don't want to, waste time with everything else. Let's give me your elevator pitch. What are you doing? What is it that brings you to the forefront, and why and how did you get there?
Definitely. So I would say my activism started primarily focused on anti-Semitism on college campuses during my senior year of college. I attended the University of Pennsylvania, and actually 2 weeks preceding October 7th, we had a conference with a litany of the most virulent anti-Semitic, anti-American, pro-terrorist speakers ranging from Susan Abu Hala to Roger Waters. And for me, considering the fact that UPenn's nickname is Jew Penn, it shattered what I viewed as my academic sanctuary, as a place where you go to learn about the values of Benjamin Franklin and our founding fathers, not the values of Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Islamic Republic. And so prior to that, had no, advocacy, nothing of the sorts. And it really, to put frankly, pissed me off. And I wrote a petition. I got over 300 signatures in 24 hours to not have this on campus. And that's kind of what propelled me. And then in that same week, this is still prior to October 7th, there was a swastika found inside of a campus building. The Chabad sukkah was vandalized. Someone broke into Hillel yelling, "Fuck the Jews," while flipping over tables at 8 a.m. And so, no matter what, whether it be, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, there's always going to be, unfortunately, instances of bigotry, of hatred. And that's the unfortunate reality. And similarly to Jews. But you don't have four different incidents in the span of about 10 days. And you can't tell me that it's not a systemic problem rather than isolated events. And so, myself, other students, professors, alumni, parents, we're basically coalescing around the idea that we need to protect Penn from forces of evil that are trying to, permeate and expand into the school. And we were having consistent meetings, Zoom meetings, in-person meetings. On October 7th, we had a meeting actually scheduled. And, rather than waking up and having that meeting, obviously the day took a much darker turn. And I was in a position, because of what happened in the weeks prior, to then continue that work after October 7th. And I'm sure we'll get into more details during this conversation, but to kind of share why October 7th touched me so deeply is that, I was out on a Friday night with my college friends, partying, hanging out. Similarly, about 800 people in Israel at the Nova Festival were doing the exact same thing as I was. And while I woke up in an ivory tower of an Ivy League school, they woke up either kidnapped, dead, still fighting for their lives, or already in Gaza. And, that, contrast, juxtaposition between these two starkly different realities was, really affected me deeply.
Yeah. And so there's so much there to go through. Let's talk about the fact that this didn't happen. It didn't start on October 7th, right? That's the biggest thing that I like. It in certain areas, Toronto here, we knew there's anti-Semitism wasn't as prevalent as you had it there prior to the 7th. It was done in a different way, very political way at schools. But you were already dealing with what you dealt with after October 7th prior to. It was just magnified in 10x come October 7th, right? Do you think that the same elements or the same people were involved in both, like at campus, or was it just the normal anti-Semites that we were dealing with over the years prior to October 7th that were doing what they were doing on UPenn?
I think it's the same people. And I think it's the same people, who were, not, I think there were, in terms of, for instance, BLM, I think there were a lot of good people that, did think what happened to George Floyd was innately wrong, and they wanted to speak up on behalf of it. And whether those people are right or wrong is not for me to judge, but I'm saying there were good people. There were also people, and I would say actually at this point it's the majority of people, who used that event to riot, to, push other communist and let's anti-democratic ideals, I'll call them. And I think it's those same people. And what I've been talking about more recently, and what I hear when I speak around the country at schools and synagogues, and I hear frequently saying, things have gotten so much better, we don't see it. And I always respond to that saying that's way worse. It's inherently worse, because if you look at what happened and you look at who was part of what happened, I'm talking professors, students, administrators, it's all the same people at all these schools. And if you don't think that they are still working just as much as they were before, then I have a bridge to sell you. And so when it's in the news, when people are paying attention in a way, a library at Columbia University being taken over, they're able to read an article about a janitor at Columbia that was held hostage for 2 hours by these domestic terrorists. What they're not able to read right now is what's actually happening. They're not able to read the syllabi that are being pushed in universities that promote Hezbollah and Hamas. They're not able to read about these intersectionality courses that teach you that because you're an American, you're inherently evil and a colonizer. And so I view it as much, much, much more dangerous right now because while, yes, physically students are more protected on campus because you don't have violent encampments, they are much more now susceptible and vulnerable to what's actually happening inside the classroom. And God forbid, if an event like October 7th happens or a terrorist attack happens in Europe or domestically on US soil on the homeland, then those same people will come out and they'll be much more organized than they were even, on October 8th.
Right. And that's I think people don't realize, and it's a weird thing where we have the same problem here in Canada. You've got the university campuses, which in the States you had the encampments were much worse. U of T had a pretty bad one. McGill was disgusting, but what we're looking at is what's actually being taught. So I have a son who just graduated political science, and the professor started, and I give political science a little more of a leniency to debate. That's literally the class. It's when it's in the arts and the humanities that they blow it the other way. But it's the professor showed up and there were two classes, two of the same classes. His roommate took one on one day, he took the one on the other day. His roommate sent him a text going, "You're not going to believe it. The professor started the class saying, I don't know much about what's happening in the war with Israel, but I do know they're committing a genocide." And right after they gave back the living hostages, and one person stood up and said, "It's disgusting. They never should have given up the hostages. They lost their leverage." And this poor kid's freaking out because he's never dealt with this yet. And my son is my son. He's much like me, so he's also a big Chabadnik. So he's got this massive beard, and he shows up to class a few days later, sits lower down in the room so he can be seen by the professor with his big Chabad beard, his kippah, and an IDF t-shirt. And he said, "Before we start the class today, professor, is this a lecture where you're going to be talking about the fact that you don't know much about what's happening in Israel, but you did other community genocide?" Professor turned around and he said, "No, we're going to pivot from that today and talk about something else." And I'm like, and I tell people that story because I'm like, that's the pushback we have to give. We have to get in front of it before they started. But then he was telling me all the other issues they're teaching, all these other, especially political science classes, the indoctrination and the syllabi and of what they're actually teaching, and the stuff that I've seen in universities that parents and students have sent me. I'm sure you've seen a lot of it too. And it's not just listen. There's no border when it comes to this because what you're getting down there, we're getting here. The things that were being sent for these students, the syllabus, just rampant, the Israeli lie. Like they're now just openly talking about it and just saying it's a lie. And they're teaching these students how to hate and how to back up terrorist propaganda. Now we look at goes from there to the anti-American, we have anti-Canadian, the anti-West essentially. How do we deal with that? Because right now it is so bad. We're looking at what just happened in the election in your state, right? New York's a disaster or will become one. They're not even quiet about it anymore. They want to get rid of the presidency, the Supreme Court, the checks and balances. How, how do we deal with this? What do you look at? How do we say we have to redo this? How do we get a restart? What do you do?
I mean, first of all, I don't think it's easy. Number one. I think number two, it can't fall on the Jews. Like this notion that, and I fault the Jews a lot for this too, honestly. And I say this openly, is that we are very quick to judge. If someone disagrees with us on one thing, then we completely alienate and ostracize them, which doesn't behoove us or what I view as a movement to save Western civilization and the cascading beliefs below that. And it's almost ironic because, it's two Jews, three opinions. But for
Yeah.
some reason, if it's three, if it's two Jews, one non-Jew, and four opinions, then we have an issue. I think it would really benefit our community to stop the what I view as berating and lecturing on almost these purity tests of people that they have to agree with us on every single thing. And it's also, in my opinion, not the Jewish way either to do things. Jews love debate. We love it.
You really do.
Let's do more of it. And this other notion, and I'll get back to your question on what do we do, but it's more, introspectively, is we have this, this use of the word anti-Semite. And to me, it's a completely irrelevant term that has no meaning anymore. And when I look online and I see someone post the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life, and then the comments are, you're an anti-Semite, and not, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. It's like, why would you not take this opportunity to correct the record? People who are reading the comments, and I've seen this before. I've met people in person who said, I used to be skeptical or anti-Israel, and then I just started reading, your posts debunking things or reading somebody else's posts debunking them, and I realized, while yes, maybe 10% of the things I disagree with that the Israeli government is doing, the 90% that I've been told and fed have been utter lies, and they get mad. People get really mad when they get lied to. And so, I think there's two different words. There's Jew hate and there's anti-Semite. Jew hate, in my opinion, is the genuine disdain and hate for Jews. I think that's
Yes.
what we saw, for instance, in 1492 with the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. That was Jew hate.
Pure Jew hate.
I think Nazism is anti-Semitism, and there's a difference. One is driven by, I hate Jews for who they are. The other is, I hate Jews not for who they are, but who I think of them to be. And it's very distinct because one is based off of, an irrational fear of Jews of something that they're not. So, for instance, when someone posts an AI photo of, Israelis burning an American flag or Israelis shooting a Gazan child, and it's purely AI, that is anti-Semitism. When somebody says, the Jews, they're ugly because of their payasses and their big noses, that's Jew hate. And I
Yes.
think it's a very big difference.
You're good.
And then, in terms of how we kind of, bring people together is, in terms of how we bring people together and how we, combat this, it is forming coalitions. And I think, as you mentioned, what happened in New York City is such a prime example of both what I said before, where it's just not in the news, so you don't know about it, and B, is what's happening on our college campuses and how it's trickling up now to the political system. Of the, was it 612 members of Congress, or 512 members of Congress? 512 members of Congress. 56 of them, if I'm not mistaken, graduated from Harvard. You flash forward 2 decades, and let's keep the same 56 people, you will get a contingent of at least, I would say, 40 to 50% of those people who vehemently distaste and disdain the United States.
Yes.
That's not a sustainable thing. The country cannot sustain itself if that's the reality. And we saw this with what happened in New York City on Friday. And so in terms of how you fix it, I think, one, you're already starting to see it on the Democrat side. I just saw yesterday, led by Tom Suozzi, who's a Congress member from Long Island, start a America PAC within the Democrat caucus that is pro, strong border policies, pro capitalism, pro American values, but then obviously also, pro LGBTQ,
Right.
pro abortion. And so, it's keeping with American principles, almost like a JFK, but then it's combating, people like Daria Chevalier, who said she wants to wipe her hands with the American flag. On the right, I think you see a lot of the podcaster world focusing on other right-wing figures, and that has led now to the rise of people like Daria I definitely fault them partially for that. And so what will eventually happen on the right, and God save the country, is in 2028, if you start seeing, let's say, an AOC or an Ilhan Omar-esque candidate, the right will essentially be forced to start uniting again and realizing that their enemies are not people who have, disagreements on foreign policy or even some domestic policy, but rather the people who want to literally indoctrinate our children, open the borders, abolish the police, and everything else. And so my hope is that it doesn't take us, there. My hope that if it does is that people will finally actually start waking up. And if it doesn't, then the country's fucked.
Yeah, pretty and that's the problem, and we look at that's that whole world, and I've said it before, the destabilizers can't destabilize her because once the people who want the destabilization to happen, those destabilizers are no longer needed. I don't think they even realize that. So then you have let's talk about that red-green alliance, which is pretty much where we're going with it, where I don't even think that right now, I see like that democratic socialist is really more what was the comment I read the other day? The Democrat socialists are thinking that they're using Islamophobia to usher in socialism, where in fact it's Islamophobia is being used to, socialism is being used to usher in is the Islamification. What we're trying to tear down everything. So they're both using each other. How do you see this red green alliance playing out? Because a democratic socialist is pretty much that red green alliance. So do you see it playing out that eventually they're gonna fade out? Do you like you just said like, we might be fucked. Do you think the Democrats, the center right Democrats can actually bring the party back?
Look, I think in major cities, it's going to be difficult. It will eventually happen. The pendulum will always swing back. We saw this with Giuliani, for instance, in New York City about 3 decades ago. But what I think is that you have the red green alliance, and then also the far right now, and what they all coalesce around is anti-liberalism in not the liberal sense, but rather in terms of democracies and democratic ideals. And it to an extent, right? It makes sense. You listen to the far right. You listen to how they speak about the Constitution, that they think it should be abolished, that it's irrelevant nowadays. You listen to Islamists. They, just want to get rid of America altogether. You listen to the Democratic Socialists of America, who also think that the Constitution is inherently evil. And so they all have this shared purpose. But at what point do the touch point, occur? For instance, the Democratic Socialists, very pro LGBTQ. Islamists, no. Far right, no. You have open border policies. Islamists, yes. Democratic socialists, yes. Far right, no. And so the question is not when they will is not if they will crash and burn.
Yeah.
It's when they will crash and burn. But the question is always still remains is when do we see that crash and burn? And is it going to be too late? Personally, I don't want to wait for, an AOC presidency for the country to wake up. And so, I think at the very least people are talking about it more. I think the new online ecosystem, while in theory was a great idea, has been completely hijacked by the dumbest voices and
Yeah. We all
clearly
thought we'd get smarter with the internet.
yes. And so now Eric Weinstein said this last week on a podcast. He said, it's as though, we killed the old media, which sucked, but then we gained the online, the online ecosystem, and it's as though everybody's IQ points just dropped 25. And it's true. It's like everything that the mainstream media that you hated about the mainstream media, the new media is that on steroids. And the worst part is that, the same podcasters that basically built their careers on we must question the media, we must attack the media, is then when you question them after they just said that they are the media now, they're like, whoa, 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 I'm just a podcaster. What do I know? And so it's this interesting give and take. And, for someone, I'm online, I have a decent amount of followers. I should be criticized just as much as MSNBC is criticized. I probably reach more people in a given day than MSNBC does. And if anything, I deserve more criticism because of that. And I should be held to the same exact standard as they are if I want to be a trusted voice. And if I do want MSNBC to lose prominence, because I do strongly believe that they have been inherently corrupted and captured by their audiences. But I think that same thing is now happening with the new media. And so if the mainstream media was smart, they would reform their own system and kind of usurp the new media. Unfortunately, I don't see that happening.
So and when you look at how quickly people are, especially with this war, since October 7th, how quickly people are manipulated. It used to be, during COVID, it was more the headlines they'd pass around. You'd read a bullshit headline, but you formed an opinion. Now it's these quick 30, 60 seconds that catch you online in a reel or a story that instantly change like the it's all I'm almost convinced if they were to put a big plan out there to really convince people the earth bring back the flat earthers, people would legitimately think that really we're flat. Like they like you said, I think we've dumbed down more than 25 IQ points. How do we push it? So where do you see a pushback on that? Because we have a big problem. Like here up in Canada, they're passing laws where you're gonna have to have verification age verification to go online. I have no problem with that. In my house, it was called mom and dad, and we didn't let our kids have the internet access, like for web, for apps and whatnot, till they were a certain age. That was it, plain and simple. And we had their logins, so we knew what was being said, who they were talking to, at what time they're like. We knew it all. I don't think the government should be in that way. But how do we counter this to get people back? Because again, like if you're now your platform is the mainstream media, essentially, right? New media. Do we get a new media? Or do we like where is the pushback? And I think we should always question. I think everybody should be questioned. I love getting questioned. You love getting questioned. Like we should be questioned. If I get pushed against the wall, I should be able to answer for what I'm saying. How do we get this normalized again, or do we just hope for the pendulum to swing back hard the other way?
Look, I think I completely agree. We should be questioned 100%, and we should be held to the same standard as we held the mainstream media, or else we're hypocrites, which I don't personally want to be. I think in terms of the manipulation of algorithms, I think that should be treated as a national security threat. I think it's information warfare. It should be treated the exact same way as ground warfare. And if you capture the minds of the youth, you capture the minds of the future. And so I think right now, Western democracies are under indexing on how polluted the online space is with just nonsense, is what I call it. And to your point, in terms of like the flat earthers and stuff, I think everyone has to remember a lot of these like podcasters and stuff, we had words for these people, 10 years. We knew who these people were. They were the QAnon, they were the flat earthers, they were, guy in mom's basement who's never held a job before, and we society looked down upon them.
Yeah.
And
And now
now,
we've raised them to a level that is so insane.
and because they just basically threw a bunch of shit at the fan, they now kind of like latch on to one thing that they predicted correctly out of the 200 false predictions, which a monkey could probably have a better statistic on that. And they're like, look, I was right. I'm right about everything now moving forward. And it's like, hold on, no, you're not. Like, if we genuinely wanted to play that game, then the mainstream media has an incredible track record. They've probably made tens of thousands of predictions between 24-hour news shows, probably 50 different anchors, and they've probably gotten it wrong, a
More than
dozen,
that.
2 dozen times, but on a percentage basis compared to you suck. And so I think it's this, and at least with the mainstream media, if they get something wrong, like really wrong, they'll put out a statement apologizing and they'll be scrutinized. Just take the Iran war, for example. I was told thousands of Americans would die. I was told gas would go up to $10. I was told that BRICS countries like China, India, Brazil, and Russia would get directly involved and start bombing US troops. I mean, that is like Orwellian level propaganda
Yes.
in terms of the fact that they predicted this 6 months ago and now they're making new predictions and think that anybody should listen to these losers about anything ever. I mean, those are huge predictions that you're putting out there, got them completely wrong, and now aren't even admitting that you got them wrong and just recycling a new prediction. And then, eventually you make enough predictions, you'll get one right, I'm sure.
Right.
And then you'll say, I was right about everything. And it's just, it's as President Trump said, it's low IQ behavior.
It reminds me of at the summer camp. There's always the kid who always said, today's color war. Eventually he's gonna get it right. Like
It's a great, yeah.
it's gonna happen.
Broken clock is right two times a day.
Exactly. So I want to talk to there's so much and there's parallels from we're up in Canada, you're in the States. We have a lot of parallels. What do you see? I'd love to take your opinion. We know a lot more. We are captured by American politics, at least I am, I find it fascinating. I think I love the American system of checks and balances. I love it all. Here we have the parliamentary system. Do you know a lot about what's happening up in Canada? Are you paying attention? And where do you see things being going, honestly, shit sideways? Because we're looking at it where we're being told America bad. We really are. And there are so many people here who suffer from, as we all call it, Trump derangement syndrome, which is just a whole phenomenon that I actually quite enjoy watching people lose their mind over the president. We actually have family functions that don't occur anymore because you walk into my house, there were each my sons and we have three boys. There were four MAGA hats when you walked in our front door, just because it was fun. You know, what do you see from your perspective looking at, Canada? And then I want to talk about the Canada-US relation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I'll touch on it in this response, but I think Alberta should secede or demand that they can start, pumping out oil. I think it's the worst thing for the Canadian economy ever that you're essentially just blocking. We're talking billions of dollars
We're
worth of
one of the wealthiest countries in the world when it comes to our
easily in
resources.
terms of the natural minerals, the rare earth minerals, the mining that could happen, the oil that could be pumped. I mean, you could have a pipeline that connects the US that connects Canada to the US down to Central and South America, essentially. That on each stop, you basically add more oil as you're going through the Permian Basin up to Alberta. And so, that's in terms of the Canadian economy, which the Canadian economy is already suffering an energy crisis. And then in terms,
Buy into it. Very basic. God, right. That society, sadly, across the West, as you saw in Toronto, yeah, that's the issue we have, right? We spend it's funny in Toronto, I'm sure it's the same in New York, in our city budget, the top line of our budget, highest growth the budget line is police, right? The challenge is when you look at the mental health issues and everything else, and you see it all the time. I see it even from on a micro level from just the Jewish community. We're all losing our minds. We're all losing it, right? But and there's a mixture of everything. We're never going to go back to what it was 30 years ago. Technology alone won't let us go back to what we grew up with, right? But we've got to find that change, and how do we fix it without band-aids, but actually make the change? Mental health, policing, everything else. So yeah, and I agree with you. If Canada just if Alberta, first of all, if Alberta left, the Canadian economy is done. That's wholehearted because they are the bank. Alberta is the Canadian bank, right? So the fact that they don't turn the taps on is mind blowing. We really are one of the richest countries in the world, natural resource wise. We shouldn't have that problem. So where do you think? I don't want to keep it much longer, but where do you think we head to this? How do you think? Because especially with the tariffs and everything else, the fact that Mark Carney won an election by blaming everything on Trump, what do we do? Because we are the closest, we're neighbors, we're brothers, like that. Like you can't get any closer than we've gotten. Do you think this gets better? Do you think that the stuff? I mean, a lot of it's a deflection. Carney can say, "I'm not doing anything, but it's not my fault; it's his fault." Right? When do you see this changing? Because that's changing everywhere from our policies for immigration, our policies for, IRGC members here, terrorists here. From what I've heard from people that I know who are close to the State Department, Canada is one of the biggest threats to US national security. So yeah, we have retail. No, it was retail jobs and it was family building. That was it. Yeah, right. No, no, I love it. No, I think it's great. Well, that was a big to come out of the 80s, I was a kid, but the 70s, they had the oil, there was the energy crisis. They had like economy was crap. The 80s brought out pull your socks up, man. Like, we got to do it. I'll tell you, my son during COVID, he was 16 years old, had to do something, and he came up again. A skill he and his girlfriend at the time, not together anymore, came up with. We're making these heart smash cakes, like a hollowed heart. You bang it, there was candy in it. Like you know, that they when you go to the Lego store, you see all this stuff going like, I'm not spending $1,000 on Lego. He was making so much money at 16. He was buying those sets. That's what they did all during like, for about 6 months of COVID, made a fortune because they learned how to do it online. My youngest son, who's 16 now, he's an amazing guitarist. He hasn't taken a guitar lesson from a human. He learns it through the computer. So we have that ability to learn the skill and then take the skill and put it somewhere else. I think people are losing that ability again. We're looking for the handouts. We're looking for the freebies. The government's not there to lift us up. The government's there to provide guardrails and security to make sure that, we don't fall off as and get destroyed. But there has to be that tough love that my father, when I was younger, I took it the complete wrong way. He gave me a tour of the house, his house, the house I lived in my entire life growing up. Gave me a tour when I was at university of the house, and he didn't come across the right way. And he looked at me and went, "You're never going to have this." He missed the part where he should have finished off with, "If you don't work really hard." He missed that part. He assumed I just kind of put it all together. Hindsight, yes, I get what he was saying, but that was the message he was giving me. I worked my ass off to get this. And I think that's what we're missing, especially when you look at how we're trying to get, you know, economy going, pay for housing. Yeah, housing is, I mean, it's worse here than it is there, but we have to look at how do we make society better? And we can't do it if we're letting, let's be honest, if we're letting elected officials do it for us. I don't know about you, but I know a lot of elected officials. This is probably the best job they've ever had for many of them. They're not the smartest people in the world working those jobs. So should we always be leaving it to them, which is part it's easy. You tear them down. People like the story of David until he becomes Goliath. Right. That's part of the problem. And yeah, no, we don't have those stories, and we don't have that rags to riches story. We don't, we look at our again, our Jewish community, we look at the community at large. And then I think, you talked about Charlie Kirk. I think, my kids gravitated to him. They like, my wife was like, "I don't really like all the things he says." I go, "You don't," but she goes, "But I admired the discourse that he had. I admired the debate that he pushed for. I admire the whole, you've got to work for it. No one's going to give it to you." It's like what I tell my kids in school when they go to school. I don't care if you fail a test, as long as watched you give it everything you got. If you gave it everything you got and you still didn't come up with a pass, then we have other shit to worry about. You know what I mean? Like, at least I saw you give it all you've got. And that's what we need to save. And people are missing that. People are missing that work ethic. But I think it's also when you look at shows, look at television now. Everybody loves that Yellowstone style, all the cowboy shows, all the cowboy community. What you're watching are people who literally wake up at 3:30 in the morning, bust their ass all day long. We're really not a lot, and they're enjoying it because they love what they do. We've kind of lost that. It's this handout mentality of just give me. I don't want to work hard for it, right? Yeah. Give me one last message you want to give people based on all that we've talked about, because I don't want to keep you for too long. We both have busy days. What if you can tell people watching this, and the younger especially? I'm sitting my kids down. My kids are gonna have to watch this. What do we tell them? I mean, the last message you gave them was huge. But what do you tell them moving forward? Like, how do we make a change so that we make a difference in the future? Right? I'm older. I'm making a difference for my kids' future. How do we get that generation, who's just maybe entering university or in college or just in the middle of it or about to come out of it, to start making a bigger push and change for what they really want? Yeah, amazing. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much. We're going to continue this down the road. I definitely want you back. We're going to have to do a lot more of these because this is amazing today. Matthew Tobe, Unapologetically Jewish. Eyal Yakoby, thank you so much. Stick around for a few seconds when we're done. Make sure you're subscribing. Make sure you're sharing. Make sure you're liking. Make sure you're getting the message out. Have a great one. Unapologetically Jewish.